Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our second iteration of Evening with Germanna this year. My name is Shannon Doherty. I'm the Education Manager of Historic Germanna, and I'm super excited that everyone has joined us tonight to hear from Kelly Arford-Horne, who's our Archaeology Site Director. She's going to be sharing a little bit about the fascinating journey of a Germanna family. Before we get into that, some housekeeping. As always, we want to thank our generous Sustainer Circle supporters who we have listed up on the screen right now. We couldn't do what we do without the support of all of these individuals and so many more. So again, thank you from the bottom of our hearts that we can continue doing this programming. This session is being recorded, so if you want to go back and look at it, it will be uploaded on our Vimeo in the coming days. We will also have the chat open for questions, but if it's easier to there's also a Q&A feature on Zoom as well. So we'll have time for a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions along the way, you can throw them in the chat or you can put them in the Q&A section, whatever is easier for you. If you have any technical issues, you can also put a message in the chat and I'll try to work that out on my end. Otherwise, yeah, I'm super excited to introduce our archaeology site director, Kelly. She's been working on this project for quite some time, and I'm super excited that has the opportunity to share this with all of us. All right, without any further ado, Kelly Arford-Horne.
All right, thanks, Shannon. I am going to start sharing my screen here. It might just take a moment. Second. Okay, so hopefully that is working and you all can see my screen. So as Shannon said, I am the archaeological site director. My name is Kelly Arford-Horne. The presentation I'll be giving today goes along with an exhibit that we recently created for Black History Month. It was on display at the Arts Center in Orange, and soon will be more permanently displayed in our HIT Archaeological Center. So the exhibit and this presentation, I would say, begin to tell the story of the Gordon family who was emancipated from Germanna in Orange County and sent to Liberia in Africa. So this is a history we are still in the process of researching. There is still likely much more to discover about the Gordon family, and we will continue to do research and learn about these individuals. All right, so as an archaeologist, we actually became aware of this history of the site through Historic Germanna's archaeology program. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of Germanna archaeology for those of you who may not be familiar with what we do. These are photos from this past season, from 2024. We have 2 full-time staff members, but most of the field work and lab work is done by paid seasonal staff, interns, field school students from the Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, and volunteers. This year, we also hosted the Archaeological Society of Virginia Field School. So altogether, we had over 50 people who worked with us either in the lab or in the field this past summer. So these are the hardworking, usually enthusiastic people who keep us moving forward and making new discoveries. The archaeology program does much more than excavate and report on findings. We also have regular open houses and site tours during the field season. We have lab night programs during the winter and spring. We had a program on glass last night. We have educational programs that take us into local schools. We also have school groups who come to visit us in our archaeology center. We take programs throughout the community, give presentations at professional conferences to local historical societies, interest groups, pretty much anywhere we get invited to speak. So we are pretty busy. And almost everything we do, we provide for free, although we do always accept donations. So thank you to those of you who donated tonight. We appreciate your support. Okay, so what sites are we excavating? I'm just going to go through this very briefly because I feel like a lot of you probably already know this. So the first evidence of significant use of this area was in 1714 when a fort called Fort Germanna was settled by a group of 42 German immigrants. They lived at the fort for several years before leaving to form new communities further west and north. The fort was dismantled around 1720 when Lieutenant Governor Alexander Spotswood began construction of his house, now known as the Enchanted Castle. About the same time, the town of Germanna was created not far from the Enchanted Castle. It was the first county seat of Spotsylvania County, which was formed in 1721. So the town included a church, courthouse, and jail, as well as an ordinary and likely residences and businesses too. The Gordon farm is the subject of our presentation today. That house was constructed around 1796 and was occupied by the Gordon family for about the next 100 years. All right, so this is what all that looks like on the landscape. There are no standing structures on the property. We are working exclusively with archaeological remains. Many of them are overlapping. So the Enchanted Castle was constructed on top of Fort Germanna, and the Gordons likely reused structures from the Enchanted Castle or constructed new buildings on top of those earlier structures. What that means is that we may find resources related to the Gordons, the Enchanted Castle, and Fort Germanna all in the same test unit. All right, so the presentation that we're doing today is connected to artifacts recovered this past season in this area over here. This is the first summer we excavated in the area of the East Dependencies, which, as you can see, are also very close to the former location of the Gordon farmhouse. We excavated 7 test units in this area. And within those units, we found thousands of artifacts related to the first half of the 1800s and the Gordon occupation of the property. All right, so here are a few images from those excavations. Because excavations are just beginning in this area, we currently have more questions than answers. This is a sample of the artifacts we've recovered. And the reason I'm showing you these artifacts is that part of our job as archaeologists is to dig and find features and artifacts, and then to figure out why those artifacts are there. So we do documentary research to help us with that. We try to find out what was physically on the property and then who was living or working on the property. So when you combine the results of field excavations with historic research, you are able to form a more complete understanding of the history of a location and a group of people. And that's what we're doing with this presentation today. We recovered all of these artifacts. We need to put them into context, connect those artifacts to individuals who were living at the site during that time period. Although we are still doing research, what we have found so far is that for the first half of the 1800s to 1850, there were 2 to 4 siblings from the Gordon family living at Germanna, and then up to 38 people who were enslaved living on the property with them. While these artifacts that you see here relate to all of those individuals, the specific history we're going to talk about today relates to research we've uncovered about 36 individuals who were enslaved on the property around 1850, who were emancipated by the will of Elizabeth Gordon and sent to Liberia. So this is a remarkable family, and their history touches on many larger themes in American history from this time period. All right, so I'm going to start by setting the scene and providing a little background information for those of you who aren't from this area, and for those of you who aren't experts on 19th century American history. And full disclosure, I am not an expert on 19th century American history, but what I'm going to do is share with you what I have learned through researching the experiences of this family. So for this context, we're going to focus on the middle of the 1800s, which is when the main part of the story takes place. Germanna is located in Orange County, which is in central Virginia, as you can see in this map on the bottom right. The population of Orange County in 1850 was a little over 10,000 people total. That included almost 6,000 people who were enslaved, 81 registered free Blacks, which means that almost 60% of the population of Orange County was enslaved. All right, so here's Orange County around 1850. This map is actually a little bit later, 1860. At this time, the county consisted mostly of scattered plantations, small farms. There were numerous mills along the streams and rivers. There was actually a thriving mill with a store and schoolhouse right here at Germanna, where the visitor center is. That was owned and operated by the Urquhart family. There were also industries such as iron, gold, and lead mining, mines scattered around the county. The county seat of Orange County was the town of Orange, which is located in the southern portion of the county, not too far from James Madison's house at Montpelier. The construction of the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, which extended from Gordonsville along the southern boundary toward Culpeper, was just beginning in 1850, and it would be completed several years later. So as you can see, most of the development in Orange County at this time was happening in the southwestern portion of the county, kind of the opposite side of the county from Germanna. The population center that had built up around Germanna during the first half of the 1700s, when Alexander Spotswood lived there, had kind of faded away. It actually didn't take long after the construction of Fort Germanna for things to start moving west. It happened pretty quickly. All right, so that is Orange County. As we said, the Gordon family's history touches on larger themes in American history and is something that was on the minds of white Americans during this time. Something that was on their minds was, could there be an end to slavery? And if so, what would happen to all those people who had been enslaved? So this was something that concerned both those who were enslaving people as well as much of the white population as a whole. And it led to the formation of the American Colonization Society, or the ACS. The ACS was founded around 1816 for the purpose of creating a colony, the American Colonization Society, a colony where free people of African descent and formerly enslaved people would live away from white society. So this was the ACS's solution to this perceived problem of what to do with people who had been enslaved, to send them to a colony separate from where the white people would live. The ACS was supported by both abolitionists and pro-slavery whites, both of whom believed that Black people and white people either could not or should not live together in an integrated society. For several years after its creation, the ACS searched for a place to build this colony, and around 1822, they settled on a location along the west coast of Africa, which they called Liberia. The ACS then began raising money for the transportation of willing free people of African descent and formerly enslaved individuals from the United States to this new colony in Liberia. Funding came primarily through memberships and donations from churches and private citizens, although the ACS did receive some federal and state funding. So just as a side note, I'm differentiating free people of African descent, or free Blacks, and formerly enslaved people, because there is a difference in their agency. So when it comes to relocating to Liberia, free people are making the choice to leave for themselves. Many times people who are enslaved are being emancipated and sent directly to Liberia without that choice. Okay, so what is Liberia? The ACS selected a 36-mile-long strip of coastline surrounding Cape Mesurado along the west coast of Africa as the location of their new colony. At this time, this land was being inhabited by the Day and Bassa peoples. According to the ACS, they purchased the land. However, there are differing accounts about how willing the Day and Bassa people were to hand the land over to the ACS. There are actually many accounts of violent confrontations between the Day and Bassa people and the American colonists after settlement began, suggesting that there may not have been a peaceful agreement over this transfer of land. All right, so Liberia was a colony of the ACS until they declared their independence and became a sovereign nation in 1847. By 1850, 7,789 people had been sent to Liberia from the United States. Individuals rescued from illegal slave ships during this time were also taken to Liberia, although Liberia was not likely their home country. So Liberia was this mixture of the native groups of the Day and Bassa people, free Black Americans, and formerly enslaved Americans, most of whom who had never been outside of the United States, and Africans from various countries who had been illegally captured, put on slave ships, and then released in Liberia. Okay, so the ACS marketed and advertised heavily. They created drawings that made Liberia look like a paradise. They distributed printed newsletters and journals, all to entice free Black people to move to Liberia and to convince enslavers to send their enslaved there. One of the things they created was this pamphlet entitled About Going to Liberia, Things Which Every Immigrant Ought to Know. So in the pamphlet, potential residents of Liberia could learn about the politics, the society, the environment of Liberia, and more. And because it's such an interesting piece of material, I just wanted to highlight a few of the questions in the Q&A section. So one of the questions was, what ought we take with us both for on the voyage and once we get there? And so their answer is, clothing for summer and winter. Winter is the rainy season. Good mattress and bedclothes to use on the ship and after arrival. Tools of your trade. So if you plan to be a blacksmith, you would want to take your blacksmithing tools with you. Table furniture and cooking utensils. A keg of nails for constructing a house. So you may have to construct your own house once you get there. And then, of course, money, if you have it. All right, another question. How much land is given to each immigrant? So one immigrant would receive a town lot or 5 acres of land. If you had a family, you might receive additional land. This next question, will the Colonization Society pay my expenses in getting there? So the Colonization Society would pay for passage and the first 6 months of living expenses, which included free medical treatment after they got there. And that was actually a really big thing because a lot of people got sick. How will I make a living? Their answer is trades, teaching, farming, accounting, by industry, and economy. Essentially, anything that you could do in the United States, you could do in Liberia. So you could become a doctor or a lawyer, or even you could become president. All right, so what food is available? Domesticated animals such as cows, pigs, sheep, and ducks. Wild animals such as deer, squirrels, ducks, and other birds, and a variety of fish. Fruits such as watermelon, bananas, plantains, mangoes, lemons, limes, and guava. Vegetables such as corn, sweet potatoes, lima beans, okra, cucumbers, yams, cassava, and greens. And actually the list for all of these was much longer. I just kind of selected a few of the highlights. So given what this pamphlet is advertising. Liberia sounds great. Paid travel, and then once you get there, you have your expenses paid for 6 months while you set up your farm or your business. There are countless opportunities for work and abundant sources of food, not to mention freedom and social equality. So it's no wonder that so many people chose to go to Liberia. It was a good place to send those who they were emancipating from slavery. Well, we don't know if the Gordons who were enslaved at Germanna knew about all of this. It is certain that the white Gordons who were enslaving them did have access to this information. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Gordon families. So there are two Gordon families. There's the white Gordon family, who was the property owner, and then the black Gordon family. So those who were enslaved by the Gordons who went to Liberia took the last name Gordon. All right, so James Gordon Jr. Acquired their Germanna tract from Alexander Spotswood's grandson, 1797. The property was owned by the family for about the next 100 years. James Gordon Jr. was a successful planter, a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. He did represent Orange County alongside James Madison at the Virginia Ratifying Convention of 1788. James and his wife, Elizabeth Gordon, had 5 children. The youngest were Elizabeth and Armistead. So Elizabeth and Armistead were siblings. They would never marry, and they would live at Germanna until their deaths in 1852. So you're going to hear their names again. James Gordon Jr. died shortly after purchasing the property at Germanna. His probate inventory from 1799 lists the names of 29 people who were enslaved on his property at Germanna at that time. Those 29 people were put up for sale several years later in January of 1805. So this is an ad in the Virginia Gazette describing the terms of that sale. I'm going to highlight a few names here. So Edie and her child Grace and Martha. So although most of the people on this list were likely sold at this time in January of 1805, these 3 individuals would stay at Germanna, and we are going to follow them and see what happens to them over the next 50 years. So remember these names: Edie and her child Grace and Martha. All right, so this is the will of Elizabeth Gordon, James Gordon's daughter. The will is dated April 21st, 1850. At this time, Elizabeth is living in the house at Germanna with her brother Armistead. Remember, neither of those 2 siblings ever married or had children. In her will, Elizabeth directs that of the people she is enslaving, Grace with all her sons, and Martha and her daughter Grace and Henry should go to her brother Armistead, then to Liberia, Maria or Mariah, Millie, Clara, and Isabella with their children to be sent directly to Liberia. So notice there is a Grace who is Edie's daughter, and then Martha also has a daughter, Grace. I'm going to refer to Martha's daughter as Little Grace because that is how she is referred to later on. And it does get confusing with 2 Graces. All right, so we see that Grace and Martha are here, but Edie is not mentioned. And I am not sure why, because she shows up in documents again shortly after this. So Elizabeth died about 2 years after writing this will. Grace and Martha and their children, along with Henry, did not go to Elizabeth's brother Armistead, as is directed in the will. And the reason they did not go to Armistead is that he died shortly before Elizabeth. And by shortly, I mean that he died in the morning and she died later that same day. So I have not been able to find any primary documents surrounding the cause of their deaths, but the oral history that has been passed down through their family is that they were poisoned. They both became sick at breakfast and died shortly afterwards. It certainly seems plausible that they were poisoned either intentionally or unintentionally, given the timing of their deaths. But right now, we don't have any evidence outside of the oral history to support that. The oral history also claims that one of the people who Elizabeth and Armistead were enslaving admitted to poisoning the siblings so that they and their family could be emancipated. There are no records that I have found that support that part of the oral history either. No one who was enslaved by the siblings was ever formally accused of murder. So Grace and Martha and their children and Henry did not go to Armistead because he is not alive. All right, we next see them in Elizabeth's probate inventory, which is dated November 30th, 1852. And here we also start to gain a better understanding of the relationships between family members. We have names for the children of Maria or Mariah, Millie, Clara, and Isabella. And we also see that Edie is listed here in the probate inventory alongside Martha. We see Grace with her son Peter and little Grace with her daughters Mary and Lucy. So these relationships are starting to come into focus. And I just want to take a moment to point out that the bottom few lines of this page is the complete probate inventory of the brother Armistead. Elizabeth, the sister, is the one who owned all the property. And I point that out because this is a very female-focused, female-dominant history. And we will continue to see that as we learn more about the enslaved Gordons. So here they are, November 30th, 1852, probably still at Germanna. Where do they go from here? All right. So the next record we have for them is 6 months later. Grace and Martha and most of the others appear in an entry from the Journal of the Board of the Virginia Colonization Society, dated May 2nd, 1853. So the Virginia Colonization Society is associated with the American Colonization Society. Essentially, they do the work of the ACS in Virginia. So in Elizabeth's will, she directed that those she had enslaved should be sent to Liberia, and it seems that is exactly what is happening here. The entry in the journal lists the names of 48 people from Virginia who boarded the ship Banshee several days earlier, destined for Liberia. Included in this list are 35 people from Orange County who are described as being emancipated by the will of Elizabeth Gordon. So there are a lot of names here, but if you will notice, Edie, again, does not appear on this list. However, she is mentioned at the end of this journal entry. So the last paragraph states that Edie Gordon, a free woman of color who was emancipated through the will of Elizabeth Gordon, was refused payment for her transportation to Liberia. The reason it seems was a technicality. The board was presented with documents, we don't know what they are, that showed Edie was not emancipated until after April 6th. So April 6th was the date the society was formed, and according to their rules, they did not pay transportation costs for anyone emancipated after that date. It is not clear why Edie was emancipated after the others. It may have something to do with her not being directly mentioned in the will, but that's just a guess at this point. So it seems like Edie was there with her family, ready to board the ship to Liberia, but the Colonization Society did not grant her payment. However, when we look at the passenger list for the Banshee, we see that Edie is in fact listed as one of the passengers. So although the Colonization Society did not pay for her transportation, it seems payment was made and she was able to board the ship and travel with her family. All right. So I want to take just a moment to look at the passenger list because it's an amazing source of information. It lists the names, ages, and known relationships between everyone in this group. And given what we know from those previous documents, we can put things together and figure out the relationships between almost everyone on this list with some certainty. So through this list, we are able to see that Edie, as the mother of Grace, is actually the matriarch of this group. Almost all of the other 35 names appearing here are the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Edie. The rest are the children and grandchildren of Martha, who, as a reminder, was on James Gordon's probate from 1799 with Edie. And I think there's a strong chance that Martha has a family connection or family relationship to Edie. Henry down here at the bottom seems kind of like an outlier, but he is mentioned in previous documents alongside little Grace, and I think he is her husband, making him the father of Mary and Lucy, and the only father of children on this list. So remember how I said this was a female-centered family? We have Edie and her daughter Grace, Grace's male and female children, and the children of her daughters, but not the children of her sons. So William and Cyrus are probably old enough to be married and have children, especially William, but their wives or children, if they have them, are not with them. All right, so I just want to take this list and then jump back in time for a moment and compare the names on the ship's passenger list with the names from that original 1799 probate inventory. And what happens when we do that is we see a lot of the same names repeated. So we have, I'll highlight here, Edie, Grace, and Martha, who are actually on that 1799 probate inventory. And then in blue, I'm going to highlight names that appear on the probate inventory that have been passed down to the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Edie, Grace, and Martha. So there are a couple of Isabellas, a couple of Lucys, Williams, Georges, Maria, Millie. The fact that these names are being passed down to new generations is a sign to me that there was a close bond between Edie, Grace, and Martha and the others on that 1799 probate inventory. And that means there may be more family connections there that we can research and explore. All right, so Edie, Grace, and Martha and their children and grandchildren, some of whom are very small infants, and most of whom have never lived anywhere but Germanna, board the ship Banshee on April 29th, 1853, heading for Liberia. All right, so I think it's important to say at this point that they are on the ship that we do not know if they even wanted to go to Liberia. As far as we know, no one asked them and they were not given the choice. They are doing what was directed for them to do as property in the will of Elizabeth Gordon. All right, so it took them about 6 weeks to sail from Virginia to Liberia, probably on a ship similar to the one you see here on the right. According to the records of the American Colonization Society, the family disembarked at the port of Grambassa, also known as Port Buchanan, on June 11th, 1853, after a brief stop in the capital of Monrovia, where they dropped off some of their passengers. All right, so we do have some information about what happened to them after they arrived in Liberia. Although the Gordons are not mentioned specifically, a letter dated September 15th, 1853, written by a doctor, Dr. J.S. Smith, who worked with the ACS, talks about the settling of the recent immigrants from the Banshee at a town called Fishtown. In the letter, he says that most of the passengers handled the initial fever well and were able to get started clearing the land and settling themselves in with relative ease. He says they are well pleased with their situation and happy. All right, but for those of you who are familiar with this story, you know that there is some bad news coming up. All right, so the last report of the Gordons I can find is from February 1854 in the African Repository. The African Repository is the journal of the American Colonization Society. It says, of the immigrants of the Banshee, 138 who were landed at Buchanan, 17 deaths were reported, 10 of which occurred among the family of 36 who were liberated by the will of the late Miss Gordon of Orange County. So This is a disappointing turn of events. I imagine a journey like this is entered with some fear, but also hope and optimism. The loss of 10 members of their family must have been absolutely devastating for them. And we do not know which of the family members did not survive, and we don't know what their cause of death was. It was very common for people to die of what was called the acclimating fever, which almost everyone who immigrated to Liberia seemed to get. The Gordon family included a number of infants and very small children who may have been more vulnerable to a fever. Also, Edie is likely in her 70s when she makes this trip. That may have made a fever riskier for her. So there was a list of deaths made for the Banshee and another ship called the Zebra shortly after they arrived at Grambassa. This list was made by a doctor who attended them at the port. The Gordons are not mentioned on this list. This suggests to me that they did not die on the ship and that they survived at least a short period of time after landing. Causes for other people, causes of death for other people who were on the Banshee and the Zebra included cholera, measles, a woman died of premature labor, and most of them, their cause of death was fever. All right, so Dr. Smith's letter, which we just saw a couple slides ago, which discusses the settlement at Fishtown, also includes some really detailed medical observations of recent immigrants. So he talks about the importance of nutrition and sending with the immigrants food supplies that provide the right diet. He discusses the prevalence of dysentery and the long-lasting effects of the fever. He also spends quite a bit of time talking about melancholy, or what we would call depression today. And this is something I feel sometimes gets overlooked when we're talking about slavery, and maybe even when we're talking about historic events in general. The Taylor family, who were settled at Fishtown with the Gordons, apparently succumbed to depression, and Dr. Smith reported no means nor device of mine could save them. It seems depression was common enough among these colonists that Dr. Smith had even studied its long-term health complications and had done experiments with possible cures. So just so you know, he found that sarsaparilla, cherry bitters, and ale worked to alleviate depression, according to his study. So we know that 26 of the Gordon family survived at least the first 7 or 8 months of living in Liberia. There are no letters, known letters that exist from the Gordons. However, there are many letters that were sent back from Liberia from others. They are a mixture of heartbreak and fear and hope and joy and everything in between. A common theme in the letters is to inquire about loved ones left behind and to express a desire to see them again. William Douglas wrote to his aunts, "I expect in a few years to see you again, and should we not live, pray God that we meet in heaven." It was also common to ask for supplies. Richard Barrett asked for a lot of things. He asked for nails, pork, shoes, fabric, knives, forks, soap, water pails. It seems like he needed a lot, and that's not uncommon. A lot of people were asking for supplies. There are also letters like that from Peyton Skipwith, who wrote that his efforts have been crowned with success from on high ever since his arrival. So what this says to me is that there isn't just one experience for those people who went to Liberia. It seems like most people struggled at first, but also eventually many were able to make a living, raise families, and even find success. All right, so as I said at the beginning, we are still researching this history. There is still much to learn about the experiences of the Gordon family and the history that surrounds them. Some of the topics that we could look into would be who are the fathers of the children who went to Liberia? Where are they? Did Cyrus or William have a family? If so, what happened to them? We can also research what happened to the remainder of the 29 people on James Gordon's probate inventory. The Isabellas and Williams and Georges and Millies, are they in fact related to Edie and Martha? And if so, where did they end up? Are there descendants of any of these individuals still in the area? And importantly for my job, there is the opportunity to learn more about their experiences at Germanna through archaeological investigation. So these are just a couple of articles written about the Gordons and the Virginia Colonization Board. They are both from 2017, I believe. One is on the Library of Virginia's Uncommonwealth page. It has some great information about the Virginia Colonization Society, and it shows primary documents associated with their board and also the Gordon family. And then at the bottom here, there's another article by Zan Nelson that also discusses the Gordon family's appearance in the Journal of the Virginia Colonization Board. If you're interested in learning more, I would recommend both of these articles. If you are able to scan the QR codes, they should take you straight there to the articles. And that is it for me. But I am happy to answer questions if there are any.
That was great, Kelly. I really appreciate all the context you gave for their story and kind of situated it in history. And um, I also appreciated you talking about the archaeology program and how that's sort of informed the direction of the story. Um, I had a question and it slipped my mind. Do we know if so the two Gordon siblings who the white Gordons, they pass away without any children, what happens to the property after that?
So I think it goes to a cousin. So I am not sure who is living there. So they die in the 1850s. I don't really think anyone moves in until maybe after the Civil War, that we know of. And then that person who moves in around that time period lives there until the 1880s. And he is the last Gordon, who lives there.
Hmm. That's interesting to know that the house is really only mainly occupied for what 50 out of 100 of its years. And how long did the house stand?
So that picture of it that was in the presentation was taken in the 1920s, 1930s.
Hmm.
And it's really in bad shape in that picture. And what happens is it gradually deteriorates over time. And then in the 1980s, there was a developer who purchased the property who dug up the foundation of the house. I guess maybe collapsed the rest of it and dug up the foundation.
Hmm.
So it's not there. We can't excavate it anymore.
So that's very unfortunate. With excavations you're currently doing, so these would all be like the property around it and outbuildings and stuff. Is that what you're finding?
Yeah, so, we just started digging in that area and we're not really sure what we're finding yet. We are not right in the immediate vicinity of the house, but like I said, we're finding thousands and thousands of artifacts. So we are close to something. We haven't found any structures yet, any remains of structures yet. So that's something that we'll continue to investigate in this upcoming summer. See if we can find structures.
And these are mostly 19th century objects that you're finding,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah, yeah. So thousands of objects from the 1800s, and then our director of archaeology, Eric, has been talking about the difference between the quantity of material culture from the 1700s versus the quantity of material culture from the 1800s. And it's just increases so much between the early 1700s and the early 1800s. People are just buying more stuff in the 1800s.
Hmm. That's interesting. I've never thought of it that way, but that makes sense. I wonder what archaeology in like 100 years will look like
Oh my gosh,
with
yeah.
our stuff. We have a question in the chat. Caitlin is wondering if you can repeat the year that the Gordons left for Liberia.
Yes, they left in 1853, I believe. So they were emancipated by the will in 1852, but I don't think they left until 1853.
How long did the journey across the Atlantic typically take?
So their trip, because we know what date they arrived and we know what date they left, it took them about 6 weeks. And I think that's pretty average, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. It's a long time to be on a ship.
Yeah, I would say that's crazy to think about. Um, Jackie Kyler in the Q&A is also asked when they were writing back from Liberia, I think it was on one of the last slides you had, one of them said 15 to 20 quotes, Americans were killed. Were they
Mhm.
being attacked by the local Liberians?
Yeah, so the Day and Bassa people would attack. There were wars and battles. They were colonists, right? So they are colonizers, and some of them are willing, some of them are not willing. But they are colonizers and they're being kind of resisted by the native populations there. And apparently there is still tension between those native Day-and-Bassa groups and the American colonizers still today. Apparently, there is still tension between those two groups.
You mentioned the country Liberia declared independence not too much later. Are these people who the colonizers who have been there, or is this like because I know the ACS kind of falls out of existence. So who is declaring independence from whom?
Yeah, so it is the colonizers. So they create their own their own government, and they create a constitution that is based on the Constitution of the United States. And they declare their independence and they become a sovereign nation. And then they elect their own presidents, and they are no longer so the ACS continues to bring people to Liberia, but the country is not associated with the United States anymore.
Hmm. And is this like a bloodless revolution, or is there fighting to
No,
no?
no. I think the goal of the ACS was that that would eventually happen.
Okay.
So that was kind of what they were trying to set in place, was that they
Mm.
would just have their own government and be their own country.
Mm. It's fascinating to think about the interactions between people who have ancestors from Africa but different parts of Africa, and then they're brought to this other country, and then now they're interacting with people who are actually native to that land. That's just a super tragic and interesting dynamic to think about.
Yeah, I think in the Americans' mind, like Africa was one place, and like people came from Africa and, oh, we're gonna send them to Africa. But like the countries are, of course, very different. And those people who went to Liberia had never been to Africa. They weren't really Africans, they were Americans. So of just, a really difficult situation kind of all around for all of them.
Absolutely. What's the most, I'll kind of close on this question. What's the most surprising thing that you learned doing your research for this exhibit and this
Um,
program?
I think, I talked about that letter that the doctor wrote where he actually went on for quite a bit about depression. And the Taylor family, who he says they were just so despondent and in so much despair that they essentially died of despair, which is not something that you hear about that often. But then he talks about it, and he talks about how he studied depression, and it seems like it must have been really common. And I was kind of surprised by that. That it was that prevalent, depression was that prevalent that this doctor would study it.
Mhm.
And also a side note, that doctor who wrote that letter, he was himself an immigrant to Liberia. He was born in South Carolina, I think. He was free. He went to Liberia when he was 7. His parents died. He became an orphan. He grew up and went to college in the United States to become a doctor. uh, Became a doctor for the American Colonization Society, and that's where we see that letter. And he eventually became president of Liberia.
Hmm.
So the doctor, that Dr. Smith, who wrote that letter, eventually became president of Liberia, which I was kind of
Wow.
excited about. Yeah,
Yeah, that's an interesting trajectory for sure.
yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Otherwise, we can wrap up the evening. But before we go, I'm just going to share my screen real quick again. Let's see. Slide. So again, presentations like tonight are only possible with the support of our Sustainer Circle support. So again, we want to reiterate how grateful we are for everybody on this list, and as well as anyone who has donated to tonight's program, anyone who has ever donated to support us. Again, these stories can't be shared without your support, and again, we are so grateful. Um, as far as upcoming evening with Germannas, we don't have any scheduled until after the summer. We figure people, want to be outside, enjoying the nice weather, starting to get a bit busy out there. So keep an eye out. In September, we're gonna start them up again in the fall. But we also have a busy slate of in-person events coming up. You can access those on our website at our events calendar, um, and our social media and main website page. But again, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Thank you, Kelly. This was super interesting. Every time I hear you share the story, I learn a little bit more. So thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for letting me talk.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you, everybody.